Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisres, Pedig Beis, Halacha Beis. We're learning today Daf Tezvav, and we're starting all the way on top by the Mishnah. We learned before that the bias that has the power to establish the Kevius, right, to trigger from now on, it's Tevel Vadai, is only when the bias is his home. The owner of the produce who brings the produce into his home, that will establish the kevios for that product. But what happens if he doesn't own the home? He's a traveler and he's lodging overnight. That's going to be basically the topic of today's entire daf, almost all of its details. We will see that it's not a black and white. We will differentiate. At times, we will consider the Motel 6, the fancy 8-star hotels, to be his home. And at times, we will not do that. Now, another detail. We also learned that when a person who's growing produce is not planning to take it home, he's planning to merchandise it, in that case, the final step that the farmer does in the field will establish the kvius even before he gets to the marketplace. Question will be, what happens if someone is planning to merchandise that which he's growing, but he plans to take it to another region in the Holy Land? As an example, a person has a field in the Galil, but he plans to sell it in Yehuda, or even the Mishnah says from Yehuda to Yerushalmi. That's the easier case to understand, because Yehuda and Yerushalmi, being that there were more people there, especially certain times in the year, so there was a greater demand for food there. So at times you can get a greater price there, imagine. So you don't want to sell it where it's cheaper, you want to sell it where it's more expensive. That will also be consequential. And indeed, it could be that the kvius will not be established when you do your final step in the field. Yes, it will be established when you enter that region. And in the Mishnah, in greater detail, we're going to have Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, not exactly, they're not debating each other. Rav Meir will be the one that will tell you this concept that a person is more particular regarding their lodgings for Shabbos versus their lodgings for the week, even though in the Gemara we'll see that certain Amoraim, very much like us, make no such difference. But let's go back to the origin. In the origin, for Shabbos, a person wants to have a nicer place. Working people that are traveling and doing business during the week, they don't care where they sleep. They care to sell. They just need a place, for a shut eye. It's not about this is their bias. So Rav Meir makes such a chiluk, as we'll see how this plays out. And then we have Shitas Rabbi Yehuda that speaks about a peddler. And he's going to have a very unique opinion, even though I'm going out of the order in this intro. The last thing we're going to learn today is a huge machlekes amoraim, how to understand Rabbi Yehuda. But let me say one of the ways in the understanding of Rabbi Yehuda, that when a peddler who's schlepping, who's carrying a lot of different products to sell in a village, when he enters a village, when he knocks on the first home, his dream is that not only will he make a sale, but he'll make some sort of deal with that first village owner for him to be allowed to spend the night there. Why is that? Because he would very much prefer not to have to walk around the whole village carrying, in Yiddish, schlepping all of his merchandise. It's much easier for you to put down what's not needed in your hotel room. Today, people come to a place. That's exactly what they do. They check into a hotel, and then they do their business. It didn't work exactly that way. Many a time, you would stay in someone else's home, even though they were strangers. It's a whole different culture. So Rabbi Yehuda says, basically, that when the Roichel knocks on the first door, even though the guy might not even invite him in, since he would want for that to be his home, that will be the Re'iyas Pnei Habayis. Fascinating. I do want to share just one from the many topics that we'll have in the Gemara. One of the Shisha Devarim that we kept on repeating about, as we should have, and one of them is Shabbos, that Shabbos is going to establish a kvius. Question in the Gemara will be, Machlekes Rabbi Yechanan and Eshlakish, is that only for the food that the person plans to eat on Shabbos? What about for foods that this person doesn't necessarily plan to eat on Shabbos? Now, on the side, I'm not talking about food that you will dafka not eat on Shabbos. That's something else. But is it only for foods that you designate to eat for Shabbos? Then we say, v'karasal Shabbos oinig, there's no such a thing as snacking. Any eating on Shabbos is called achilas keva. Or no, only for foods that were designated for Shabbos. If they were not designated for Shabbos, even if you end up eating it, that's the machlokes. Might be permitted and it might not be permitted. One other topic that we'll have in the Gemara, there is a rule concerning demai. Let's go back to demai. That there are certain times that a person does not have to separate the demai separations, and one of them is the Mishnah words it on the giver that what that ma'achilin es achnisoi demai. That means if I have guests, I can feed them demai. And by the way, this isn't only a din on the gifter, on the host. It's also a din on the guest. That if a person is traveling through, even a chaver, which normally will have to separate the trumas meiser v'chulei from the demai, he's allowed to eat the demai because of the rule that machilin es achnesoi demai. Now, the topic of our daf, how do you define a guest? When a person checks into a hotel, how does he feel over there? Maybe we're going to say that the moment a person is staying overnight and that person is in a lodging that's in our vernacular, balabatish, he's no longer a guest. He's at home. It's amazing. And by the way, I'm saying the word hotel. That can even apply when a person is a guest in someone else's house. It could be that if I'm a guest in your house, but I'm staying overnight, I lose the status of an achnesoi for this din. And the balabas cannot feed me the mai. I'm not allowed to eat the mai. I'm not a traveler. I'm a local resident. For when? For one night. Maybe only for Shabbos. In other words, a lot of the topics that we're going to learn today from Maisres will overlap with the dinim of the mai. That's a sikum of today's daf, even though it was out of order, but it's really fascinating. Let's start inside. Daf Tezvav. So the first focus of the Mishnah, the way we're learning the Mishnah, is about someone who's planning to merchandise his produce. There, the rule is that the kvius is established in the field when the person, by grain, when you make the meruach, when you smooth the pile, as we learned a lot in the first chapter. Here, you plan to merchandise it in another region. So hamal lepeiros. What example? From Galil, that means you farmer, you own a field in the Galil, and you harvested it to sell it, but you plan to sell it in Yehuda, or even in Yehuda proper, that you have a field in Yehuda, but you plan to sell it b'shuke Yerushalmi. Now, in this direction, as many of the commentators say, that the reason why the person is planning to do so, because generally, Yehuda vis-a-vis Galil, people will pay more money in Yehuda. All of the Americans are there to be taken advantage of. When you even from Yehuda to Yerushalayim, you sell it for more money in Yerushalayim. Why am I saying that? Because if you remember, the Gemara really asked, I think Davav Zayin, that even if a person plans to merchandise it, why don't we say Re'iyas Penei Hashuk? Why don't we say when you take it into the market, now it's established? We don't say that. Why not? Because we said because if the loikeach will come to your field to buy it, you'll sell it to him in your field. That logic doesn't apply here, because here, I know there are exceptions, but as a rule, when a person is planning to take it to a region where he can sell it for more money, he won't sell it to a local purchaser that will try to convince him, sell it for the lower price, at least you'll make money right away, at least you won't have to schlep it. So that will be the logic in this direction. Be'emes, it's not only about because it's more expensive there, as we'll see in the Mishnah, but that's the way they explain it over here. So here the rule is that oichel achuhu magia lamokim shuhu oilach. That now, one second. So first of all, the kivios is not in your field. The kivios is only when you enter your region. But hold on. Now really comes another kasha. Okay, even though it's the produce will not have a kivios in the field by the meruach because I'm selling it in Yerushalayim, but if I lodge overnight, why don't we say that the Re'iyas Penei Habayis will also be koiveya? That's another thing the Mishnah is saying in between the lines. We don't say that. In other words, we say that when a person is traveling from point A to point B, even if they overnight, I'm saying this dafka, the Gemara says what I'm saying. I'm saying what the Gemara is saying. This has to do with the culture. This is not a engraved law. People that were traveling, they would stay overnight. They wouldn't care where they would stay. They didn't consider that place. If it turned out that they had a nicer inn, a big gesund, if it turned out that they have a Motel 6 minus a big gesund, they didn't care. That it's dangerous to be on the road at night. The Gemara says in the beginning, right in Brachas, that you have to go in. You have to go in when it's dark. Say there. So they went in when it's dark, and when they wake up in the morning, they leave. So that's another din, that the inn that you are staying, Latanakama, as a rule, is not called your bias, even though you're paying for it. And therefore, you are allowed to eat until when you get to your location. And now, v'chein bechazira. Interesting way it's written. I'm reading it that way because there's a yud after the zayin. Guys, again, there are different ways of learning this. I'm going to go with what the Rashi earlier, what I said until now was all the Rashi earlier, and that is that if this man owns a field in Galul, he owns a field in Yehuda. If the produce that he took from Galul to Yehuda, the Mishnah is saying, it only gets a kvius when he enters, we will word it, Bishuke Yehuda. Now this guy harvests new produce, says the Rashi earlier, from his fields in Yehuda, and for whatever reason, this he plans to sell in the Galil. So even though this same guy, for the produce that he had in Galil, we said that the kvius only happens in Yehuda. Now, the fields in Yehuda, you would say, now the fields in Yehuda, he's merchandising it. There we should say that the Gemar Malacha is in the Sada, because even the ones from Galil, Nigmar Malachton in Yehuda, we don't say that. Even though the prices in Yehuda is more expensive. So why is this farmer going to schlep it to a place where it's going to be less expensive? Doesn't matter. That's the point of the Rashi earlier. If the person decides, I am not selling it here, I'm selling it in another region, then the rule that your produce becomes established in the field goes out of the window. I want to dafka read it inside. So the Rashi earlier, probably 6-7 lines in the bottom of the right column. He doesn't have the yud. The chazira doesn't sound good. No, it's not that he changed his mind. Not that he took it to Yehuda, then he changed his mind. He has a field in Galul that he sold in Yehuda. He also has a field in Yehuda, and va'achar shemachar peiros Galul sham, after he sold the produce that he grew in Galul in Yehuda, now asaf peirosav min asada. Now he goes into his field in Yehuda, and v'hoilichan Galul, and this he's going to schlep back to Galul. So says that Ash kishachoizel beisoi kiven de megamasay hu Galul, since his kavana is to sell it only when it comes back to the region of the Galil, lo yehut belu. It doesn't establish its kvios in Yehuda. The komash malan, the loy gozrinon, the kiven shezeho yohoylech li Yehuda, the choizel Galil. So mechse shehichlef schorasei peres beperes. He's saying another chiddush. It looks like the guy is trying to circumvent the din that you can't snack on it. He's trying to wiggle himself out of the seriousness of Maisris. And really what he's doing is he's switching produce for produce. Why couldn't he sell the ones in Galul and the ones in Yehuda and Yehuda? He's making us a switch. Why don't we say the switch itself is like a sale? And a sale is also keveya. We don't say that. Komash malon. It's not keveya in the soda. If he doesn't plant this, a sale is keveya right away wherever it happened, whether he planned to sell it, whether he did not plan to sell it. With the only thing that we already learned from a Mishnah that we're going to have later, that even by a sale, for some reason, if the loikeach doesn't take 2 or more at a time, even though he paid for it, we don't, it nishkaferlich. Again, guys, don't forget one thing. No one is speaking about having a su'uda with this produce. No one. The topic, whether hutbalu, loy hutbalu, did it have a kavius, not have a kavius, is all about achilas aray. Very important. All about snacking. Okay.
He probably had different produce in Yehuda and Galil, right? Like it's probably different stuff.
I think that Asher earlier you're saying even if it was the same stuff, maybe for tax reasons, for some craziness, for some reason the guy is going back. Okay. So now Rab Meir says, hold on. No, it's a part. There are 2 dinim in the Tanakama. The din of that since you plan to sell it in another location, so we no longer say that your paytas are hutbalu basada. And then also the Tanakama is saying, what about Riyas Pnei Habayis? You don't say Riyas Pnei Abayis when you stay in an inn. On the second, Rav Meir has an opinion. Rav Meir says, no. Now, here we're going to read the Mara Fulda. Everyone says more or less the same, but the Mara Fulda simplifies it. 5 lines from the top. Rav Meir says like this: Very important. He understands Shvisa not to rest for the night. That there is an exception. That when a person is traveling and now they stop in the location where they plan to spend Shabbos, the Gemara is going to say that doesn't even have to be Friday. It can be Monday. The place that you're stopping, and that will be the place that you will stay there throughout Shabbos, says, now guys, Shabbos itself is koiveya. It's not about Shabbos. Umiyad, the moment you get to that inn, now hukvu'u. In other words, the Mara Fulda has to point out, Shabbos is one of the Shisha Devarim. We're not talking about waiting until Shabbos. The very fact that you, according to Rabbi Meir, the relationship that a person has with the inn in which they plan to spend for Shabbos is different. They feel about that place different. There they feel, this is my residence. Taka rented, taka an inn, a hotel, a motel, doesn't matter. It's not about the fanciness of it, even though in the Gemara we'll see such a concept because most people look for Shabbos to stay in a nicer place. We'll have that in the Gemara also, but I don't think it's only about that. It's about the psychological relationship that you have in the location that you plan to spend for Shabbos. And I want to reiterate, the Gemara is going to speak about Amoraim, that I can relate to them. I think we're living in a very wealthy generation. That people don't do that. People stay in a nice location. Many people, they go to a hotel on vacation and it's nicer than their home. Mamish. So that has to do with all of this. Rav Meir doesn't say what. We were not Magia lo soif daitoi, but he gives this klal. He argues with the Tanakama. It's not a rule. Shabbos is different than the weekdays. This is beautiful. Okay. Now, we're going to have a lot more about this in the Gemara. That is Rav Meir. And as I mentioned, there is a Rabbi Yehuda, but it's about something else. We're going to speak specifically about a roichel. Now, haroichlin hamachazrin ba'ayoris. Don't forget, guys, a roichel who would normally sell perfumes and other cosmetics doesn't mean that he's selling produce. It's not about him selling produce. It's about a roichel that has with him produce that was not yet tithed, produce that belongs to him. So it did not have the kivius basada. That produce will only become fully established when there is a ri'iyas penei habayis. And this roichel is also going to lodge. That's what he does for a living. He goes from village to village and he stays overnight. So haroichlin hamachazrin ba'ayarais, says the Tanakama, oichlin, if they bring their own produce, they can eat at shehein magiyim l'makim halino. Now, to me, this sounds that the roichel, maybe the roichel is different than a commoner, that a roichel will view his place of lodging anytime, anywhere, as his bias. Maybe because people that live on the road, I can understand that. It was if I make a trip twice a year, my home is my home, and then is my bias. It depends. Shabbos, weekday, fancy, not fancy. There's something. A roichel, I would say, a traveling businessman, that's their home. Now, what he is saying.
So is the disagreement about Shabbos? Is that the disagreement?
No,
with Reb Meir?
Slow down. Not the way I understand the Mishnah. This second case has nothing to do with Rav Meir. And this Tanakama of Rabbi Yehuda is not arguing with the Tanakama of Rav Meir. This is a din of a roichel. That's what I'm trying to explain. That a roichel, by the very fact, a traveling businessman has a different relationship with his lodgings than someone who doesn't travel that often, however you define that often. Make sense?
Is that roichel goes to the same city over and over again, or is it different cities what we're talking about?
I think Yakir is making a good point. Maybe by the fact that the roichel goes to his same village, that's his place. I think that's a good point. I think that for sure in halacha will make a difference. That's my, and many people when they go to a hotel, I remember I lived in Hong Kong, Shluchim, had a merit. Many people used to rent their same room. There were Yidden that lived there for half of the year, mamish. Then the Chabaras was in the Hilton Hotel, and people mamish had that room. They viewed it as their home. Very wealthy people, they paid a lot of money for that. It has to do with that. So maybe a roichel because it's the same place, but it's nice, makes sense. But a roichel, now he goes from home to home, and he can still nash on his produce. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Now, there's going to be a machloikis today, how to understand Rabbi Yehuda. What we're saying now is not according to everyone, but says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, not until when he goes to sleep, not when he comes to his makom halina. Bayis horishoin hu beisoi. There's a huge chiddush. Bayis horishoin hu beisoi means that since a roichel is carrying a lot of merchandise, he would prefer to stay at the first home that he's trying to sell to, even though he didn't even ask them whether he can lodge overnight. Not like Yakir, he doesn't know these people. Since mitzidoi, he would prefer for his lodging place to be the first house when he enters the village, even though he doesn't know whether the owner will agree or not. He doesn't know that. Since mitzidoi, his mind, this is my home. Yeah, that's it. The moment you made a sale there, you bias the little nash that you had, your crackers, whatever you have, you can't not nash in it anymore. Why? Because it had the Iyas Pnei Abayis. I love this. As Asfara. And I be pasking like Rabbi Yehuda a lot more than Ameir. Look inside the Marafulda. Habayis Rishon, the last one in the Mishnah. Sheboir, Shehu Lon. Oh, he writes Shehu Lon Sham Kaiveya. But it's not because he's going to be there, because he wants to be there. Okay, Rasharilio, that's where I got it from. The left column, 5 lines from the top. Bayis Rishon or basic koloimer, Bekivin Shehigia la Bayis Rishon Shebeir. Sheyolinu Sham Nitla Peres, Afapi Shaloy Lonu Sham. Even if he's not going to end up there, he's only going to end up in the middle of the city or at the end of the city, because he would want to stay there. For him, it's his house. Maybe it means there are like 3 hotels. There's the hotel. Maybe it has to be at least a hotel. He doesn't know if there's room not. So there's a greater chance, even though it turned out that he didn't end up staying there. Maybe that's the pshat. Not any residential house. But the one thing is Vadei. Rabbi Yehuda is saying that even though we don't know yet whether he will stay there, if there's a possibility and he would want to stay there, that already becomes his house. But all of this is regarding the roich. Okay. Now, one of the rules, one of the Shisha Devarim, is Shabbos itself. Shabbos Kodesh itself is Koiveya, which means if I have produce that was not tithed, now how do I have access to it on Shabbos? I don't know. I didn't take it into my house the normal way. I took it into the house through the skylight. I found a wrongfully, but I found a way to exempt myself from establishing Maisris. No one will have a su'uda on it. No one did that, but they would allow themselves to snack on it. We say on Shabbos, Shabbos, Shabbos Einig. There's no such a thing as a snack. Everything is chashuv. Okay, says the Gemara, what happens if you have peiros, shalakatan, shaloy litzoyrech Shabbos? Now, I know there are different ways of learning it. One way would be, we're not going to learn it that way, that you have in mind that you will not use it on Shabbos. That's not the way we'll learn the Gemara. That actually can make that produce muktzah. We're talking about produce that was not specifically designated for Shabbos.
Why would anybody want to carry extra merch stuff with them?
When I traveled to sell my father's curtains and tablecloths, that's exactly what we did, because we would travel for 2 or 3 days. And in this village, you sell the curtains. In that village, you sell the tablecloths. Not true. You go on one trip.
Why would you not take your master out before you travel so you don't have to carry the...
You're talking about why would you not? Yeah, kasha. But that's not a kasha. That's the way, the Mishnah has to discuss what will be the halacha. Okay. Now, the kocha alei and hashabbos. Now comes Shabbos. We're not speaking about the topic yet of our Mishnah yet. So we have a machloikes. Rabbi Yechanan Amar, that even though the produce that you have in your possession was not specifically designated for Shabbos, it doesn't matter. That's the rule. HaShabbos toivelis, it establishes tevel. You can't even snack from it. No, Rab Shimon ben Lakish Omer, nicht azoi. Ein ha-Shabbos toiveles. Ein ha-Shabbos toiveles. Now, it sounds like Reish Lakish is saying you can eat it on Shabbos. So I want you to know that that cannot be the Pshan and Reish Lakish. Because even if you have produce that you didn't specifically have in mind to eat on Shabbos, since the Karasa La Shabbos Oinig gives a mitzvah in eating on Shabbos, there is no such a thing as Achilas Aray. Eating is not called Aray, it's a mitzvah. A mitzvah by default is not Aray. Okay, so that's number one. Question is, what about after Shabbos? That's the question. In other words, let Rabbi Yechanan, since Shabbos was koiva'as, that's it. Let Reish Lakish after Shabbos, that's very important. Make it clear. No, it's a machlekes, the poil between Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish won't be about eating it on Shabbos, but since you were not you did not specifically have in mind to eat it on Shabbos, according to Reish Lakish, the fact that Shabbos enters doesn't do anything for this produce, and after Shabbos you can continue snacking. Why are we learning about it? Now we're going to link it to our topic. So now, Mosiv, Reb Shimon ben Lakish Rabbi Yechanan, do you who hold Shabbos toiveles al daitcha or al daitoch the Tamar ha-Shabbos toiveles? Did we not learn in our Mishnah? First case. Hamal Peirus min Hagol Yehuda, or from anywhere, even from Yehuda to Yerushalmi. So the Tanakama says, Oichel at shuhu magia lamakim shuaylach v'chein b'chazira v'chein b'chazara. So far, and now we're going to add a brayso of a Tanei Allah that this is even afilulan. Why don't we spoke it out of the Mishnah? And the brayso adds the words. This is not Rav Meir. This is the Tanakama. Afilu Shabbos. How can that be? In other words, according to you, Rabbi Yechanan, that any type of produce, no matter whether you had a mind, didn't have a mind, Shabbos itself designates it as Tevel Gomor, then how do you explain all of this? Even if it was not brought into the house, even if you left it outside, Shabbos Toivelas. So how can the Braisa add the words Afilu Shabbos, Afilu Shavas? So Amaloi, so Reish Lakish, so Rabbi Yechanan tells Reish Lakish that when the Braisa says Afilu Shavas, means Beroitze Lishbois. In other words, even when he settled into the inn that he will be spending Shabbos, which is exactly against Rav Meir, that's the Tanakama against Rav Meir, we say, according to the Tanakama, that when you're traveling, your lodgings are not your home. There's no Re'iyas Pnei Habayis. Now, there's another din that the Braisa, which is elaborating the Mishnah, is not even addressing, and that is Shabbos Kodesh itself, and a Chanami. And Rabbi Yechanan says Shabbos itself is koivas, has nothing to do with Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, has nothing to do whether you are at home, whether you're traveling, and that's that. That's Gavaldik. In other words, look inside the Mara folder. Beroitza Lishbois. 9 lines from the bottom. That Hoda Tani Afilu Shabbos, Hainu Beroitza Lishbois. Mighty. Vakata lo yigia Shabbos. Mutar kol yimei achoil ad Shabbos. But enachanami. Avol kishigia Shabbos. According to Rabbi Yechanan, always Shabbos itself somehow affixes all produce that now it has to be tithed, prior to which you may not even snack from it. And furthermore, Teida Lucha. Shuhu Kain, I'll prove it to you. Because now, when the Braisa, or this Braisa, or another Braisa, and the other Braisa is speaking about Rav Meir's opinion, not the Tanakama's opinion, that the Rav Meir says, hold on, that the type of inn that one spends Shabbos in becomes his bias. So says the Braisa, Afilu Shavas Basheni. Like we said, Afilu Shavas Basheni means that even if you are come to a place on Monday, and for whatever reason you decided that I'm only going to continue my journey after Shabbos, since this will be the place that you right now are planning to spend Shabbos in, that's Shitas Rav Meir, for you, that's your bias. Now, V'yesh Shvisa Basheni, Monday is never Shabbos. In other words, what are we speaking about? Just like when the Braisa is elaborating Shitas Rav Meir, no one is speaking about Shabbos Kodesh itself. The question is it going to be nitbal prior to Shabbos from when you entered your inn, your lodgings? That's the meaning. So Afachi, the other Braisa that elaborates the Tanakama, is only beroitza lishbay. So therefore, nothing can be used from that to go against Rabbi Yechon and Shita, that there's another din, that Shabbos itself, which is one of the Shisha Devarim, it's not just it's koiveya when you eat it. It's not only for produce that you plan to eat. Shabbos, the Kedusha of Shabbos is so powerful that all of the produce that you own becomes nitbal. Okay. And now that we mentioned Rabbi Meir, this will be an elaboration of Shitas Rav Meir. Hakol Moedim Belina. Hakol meaning in the first part of the Mishnah, both the Tanakama and Rav Meir both agree that stam, a regular lodging overnight when I'm traveling, that in itself she'enu teveles. The only machlokes they have is regarding the lodging in which you plan to spend Shabbos in. So now the question is, ma bein lina or ma bein shvisa? Why does Rav Meir make such a difference? So the Gemara explains. Look at the words. Adam migalgel belina. Migalgel means, he writes here, a person adopts to any, in Yiddish, gilgol. People accept verdreien sich during the week. For Shabbos, people are more particular. The ein odem megalgel b'shvisa. Very simple. A person, it's about, look inside the Marav Fulda. Odem megalgel b'lina. Second line from the top. In other words, when it comes to the week, the psychology of a person, we're speaking about a guy that's a merchant. We're not speaking about someone going vacation. You want to sell as much as you could. Why are you staying overnight? You don't even want to stay there. It's balkarchay. It got dark, and you have to stay there. Lefikach din lina kedin haderech. It's as if you are on the road. All the marafulda. Aval ein odam muchrach lonuach velishbois yoim o yemayim b'makom echad. Ela karchach mishum sheroitzehu lishbois kedei lirois em yuchal limkar shom aperes. Okay, but when it comes to Shabbos, why? Wait, the Marafulda is saying it. He's not speaking about beauty. It's speaking about that the desire that a person has to be in the same area for a certain amount of time, the way he makes it sound, not about the beauty.
But on that premise, why can be makish the desire for if the area is more profitable for business?
I know, Kasha. Okay, I didn't learn the way when I was learning yesterday, I didn't learn the way the Marafulda learns. I understood it that during the week a person is more particular where they want. During Shabbos, a person is more medayik where they want to stay. And they consider it their place. Person is shoyvis more. Even because of Hilchas Shabbos, you're there. From me, if you go to a hotel, it happened to everyone in the Stama, and it turned out that it's very noisy or very this or very that, nothing stops you middle of the night of leaving. Shabbos, you can't do that. No, with Shabbos, it's your place. Staying there. You accept it. This is my residence. Ve'ein adam megalgel b'shvisa. Person will make peace to spend the night anywhere. Ve'ein adam shoyves b'chol makom. These are maybe two svaras. Okay. Says the Gemara, asks the Gemara Kashem. L'kula alma, you said, even according to Rav Meir, Staman in is not considered, will never be considered your home. And therefore, concerning our halachis of Re'iyas Panei HaBayis, there is no Re'iyas Panei HaBayis, it's not your bayis. Frek the Gemara, we learned in a Braisa, Maisa Rabbi Yeshua, Sheho Yemahalach Achar Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakai, Livnei Chayil. Now really, either Bnei Chayil or Broir Chayil is the place in which Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakai had his yeshiva, and Rabbi Yeshua is going to his yeshiva. Now, V'hoyu b'nei oisen ha'ayaros meviim lahem peiros. Lohen. Interesting expression, because when the great Rabbi Yeshua, he's a Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakai, but he's Rabbi Yeshua. That means that when he traveled with many of his Talmidim. So while they were traveling, listen to what happened. The locals were so honored that Rabbi Yeshua, the Talmidov, the Chaveirov, Avir, that they gave them produce. Now, what the Yerushalmi finds it unnecessary to write, as we mentioned in our words of introduction, that there is a rule that an achnesoi is machilenois and demai, that you are allowed to give to a guest demai, both a heter on the gifter and a heter on the guest, even if they're both chaverim. So they gave them peiros, which means they gave them demai. Omar lahem Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Yeshua told his chevra, listen, im lanu kan, if we're going to stay here overnight, we no longer are going to be considered an achnesoi. An achnesoi, I know it means a guest. Legally doesn't mean a guest, according to Rabbi Yeshua. An achnesoi means if I am traveling through this area, but I don't plan to overnight, now I'm a guest. So if I stop in your house for an hour and you give me something to eat, I don't have to take off the demai separations. So he told his guys, listen, I don't know who's making the itinerary, but if the plan is to stay overnight, we no longer have a din of an achnisoi, and therefore, anu chayavim la'aser. I know the maestris doesn't mean the bona fide maestris, but the demai maestris, but the imlav, only if we don't plan to stay overnight, that's what Rabbi Yeshua told his people, ein anu chayavim la'aser. Okay, now the Gemara is making a correlation. In our sugya, you're saying, Beilin I've made, Beilin Tanakama, Beilin I've made. Where you sleep overnight doesn't make that your residence. So why did Rabbi Yeshua comment as a premise that if we plan to stay overnight, mitamol, we lose the din of an achnesoi, we have to be ma'aser demai. Why? It was during the week. The lodging overnight is not called a lodging. It's not called their home. If it's not my home, why am I not a traveler? I'm staying in your home. I'm staying in the inn, even if I'm paying for it. And the Gemara says, you're right. It has to do with the individual. It's not an engraved rule. Amar Rabbi Ze'era, look how it's spelled with a heat. That Rabbi Yeshua datoi nikia. I love this expression. I know datoi nikia, it sounds like something very holy. Here it doesn't mean something very holy. It means he was very particular. It means that he would only stay in a nice lodgings. He only traveled on business class.
I was just going to say that.
Huh?
I was just going to say the same thing. Business class flights. Yeah, you're comfortable. So this has nothing to do with Shabbos then, right?
A second. Shlomo is taking a point. He's saying that data nekiya means the opposite, because I know where he comes from. When I come from a place that if the shul looked nice, it was a chesaron. For some years, I was as ingrained, I have to uproot that. That holiness means you're tzubrach and you're tzahakt, it's ugly. If you walk into a shul and it's nice, it's modern, it's not holy. So Shlomo is saying, yeah, data nekiya means, because it's everyone stayed in Motel 6. Rabbi Yeshua was so holy that for him, a Motel 6 and the Hilton Hotel is the same thing. I'm not saying that the Hilton Hotel for me is the top hotel. That's not true. For me, the Hilton Hotel is like Motel 6. That's a big, terrible thing that I have. But anyways, I just like the data nekiya. Okay.
But this means it has nothing to do with Shabbos, right? The whole opinion of that you have to wait for
No,
Shabbos.
it has nothing to do with Shabbos. Very good, Danny.
You just want to have a nice
let me
place.
word it this way. No, let me word it. Let I've made Rabbi Yeshua's relationship to his place of lodging during the week was like everyone had during Shabbos. They say in English these expressions. Let's say work hard and play this.
Work hard and play hard.
No, there's another expression. No, you're working. When you're staying in a hotel, you're going to spend more money than your whole revach. I know how it works. Based on your chaloimus.
You can sleep only in a nice place.
You can only sleep in a nice place. Thank you. That's what he's saying. Yeah, that's what it means, data nekiya. Show you the af belina makpid. Sheyehei makim menucha. Remember one Shabbos many years ago, I needed to go away. I felt I have to go away. I mamish needed to rest. So there's the hotel that I normally stay in was booked out. So I call up Jonathan, Rabbi Jonathan Abasai, tell Johnny, I need a nice hotel. In his mind, he gave me the nicest hotel that he knows. For me, it was like Motel 6. The reason was because when he goes with his family, he gets a room that has a nicer view. I got just a simple room right in front of the parking lot. Everyone parked under my window, like Motel 6, somewhere in the Laguna. Verstehst? And I'm the dat in Ikea. Okay, good. Now, look at the words. What you're telling me that Rabbi Yeshua was a fine picker, a fine schmecker. What everyone else is a fool? No. Everyone, many other people are particular. So the Gemara says, El Rabbi Yeshua. He says like this: everyone would like to stay in a nice place. Everyone would like to stay in a nice place, but not everyone gets to stay in a nice place. Since Rabbi Yeshua, at that time in his life, he came with the whole entourage, the entourage made sure that he always stays in a nice place. So it's not about what you like, it's about your reality. Ella, Rabbi Yeshua, since the Levi Yosef Shchichalei, many people traveled with him. So who do Amar Halino Tevelis? For him, in his experience, whenever he traveled, they got him a nice place. Since they got him a nice place, he considered it his home. But Usha'ar b'nei Adam, it's not like the other people are not dat nikia. Everyone would like to be wealthy, shkoyach, but not everyone is wealthy. And most people, for Shabbos, they spend their money. During the week, they can't do that. For Sha'ar b'nei Adam, the leis aliviyase shchicholoin, they don't have all these people traveling with them. They don't have the luxury to always have the most nice accommodations. Sometimes they stay over there in Laguna Beach. If you would hear my hotel, if you would hear the money that I paid, it would sound like the biggest hotel in the world. But sometimes you end up in Motel 6. Let's go to the next part of the Mishnah. So the Tanakama says that when does the Roichel have his home? When he enters where he's going to sleep. Oh, very good. Oh, very good. Now comes the kasha. Now we're going to go back to the Roichel. See, I forgot. What's the Roichel? 1 second. You just said that the Shar B'nei Adam, that some people, they're not shoitim. The opposite of dat and Ikea means they're not that. But they can't always afford to stay in a nice place. So why is the Roichel different? The Roichel also will stay in a nothing of a motel, that he won't consider it his home. So now we're coming with a chiddush, and that's going to be consequential. So the Gemara says, let me tell you what it means. We're speaking about a roichel that doesn't stay overnight. He comes back home. He sells in the nearby villages. Ma'u makem halin, according to this understanding, Bishitas Rabbi Yehuda, it means his home. Fakert. It fits. That's the whole point. That a roichel, even if he stays overnight, that's never his home. The roichel, the few dollars, the few kopecks that he makes doesn't allow him to stay in a nice place. We're changing the whole understanding. The Mishnah is saying that a roichel travels during the week. I don't care where he stays. Only when he gets the Tanakama, not Rabbi Yehuda. Only when he comes back home, that is when, then that's the bona fide that Yespnei Abai is. Says the Gemara, and now we're going to have it clear. Now there's two ways of understanding. Shitas, Rabbi Yehuda, Rab Hoshaya, and Rabbi Chalafta. Let's go with the first. That Rab Shimon ben Lakish, in the name of Rabbi Yoshaya, he's going to authenticate. That's Taka the Pshat in the Mishnah. Kegoin Elaine the Kfar Chananya, peddlers of Kfar Chananya, the Novkin v'Sacharin Arba v'Chamish Kuriyain, that they were able to do business in 4 or 5 villages near their own, and they B'chlal never stayed overnight. That was the business. They stayed. They went to the nearby villages, Va'island, the Machin bevoitein, and they would come to sleep in their own homes. Very good.
So this is somebody that has not done the matzah yet, and they don't have to do it until after they come back to their house. That's a different.
That someone who will be allowed to continuously snack until when they come into the house, because there isn't Riyas Pnei Abayis. That's the normal din. No, that's.
That be the same as taking it to the market if you're going out.
They're not selling that produce. They are selling perfume. They have snacks on them, their own snacking food. However, Zakti Gemara, Tani Rabbi Chalafta ben Shol. This Rabbi Chalafta is going to explain Shitas Rabbi Yehuda that the Roitza Adam lefaleach asaka v'bayis adishin shu pegei v'lolun sham, that a peddler would want to unload everything that he's schlepping around. When does he want to do that? The first home that he comes there. So that's the way Rabbi Yehuda argues with the Tanakama. And this is important, that even if he doesn't end up lodging over there, since his intention would be halavai, I would be able to lodge there. That is where Rabbi Yehuda holds that what? That that bias is going to be koveya. That bias is going to be koveya.
Right, question.
1 second. Huh? Even if it's Motel 6, that's correct. Now, I want to add another nuance over here. That really there's a big machloekas, like we mentioned, between Rabbi Shaya and Rabbi Chalafta. Because according to Rabbi Hoshaya, who understands that our whole mission is speaking about a peddler that never stays overnight anywhere. That's the mashal of Rab Shimon ben Lakish. That they worked in towns that were near their own. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, they're also not sleeping there. According to Rabbi Hoshaya, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Shloima, what's Pshat Beis HaRishon? Pshat Beis HaRishon is that even if he doesn't plan to sleep there, a person who has a lot of merchandise that would like to put it someplace, let's call that a warehouse, that in itself makes it a bias. That will be Shitas Rabbi Shaya b'Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. And on that argues Rabbi Chalafta. Rabbi Chalafta tells Rabbi Hoshaya that even Rabbi Yehuda won't hold that your home will be the place where you just put your merchandise down. That's not your home. It has to be a place where you want to lodge. So it has to do, even though you don't have to end up sleeping there, but there has to be a desire not only to leave your merchandise, but to sleep there. Now, why would you want to sleep in the first house? To be able to leave your merchandise there. So now there's really a new machloekas, according to the way we're learning, according to Rabbi Yeshaya, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Re'iyas Pnei Abayis, for someone who's taking a lot of merchandise that they would prefer not to schlep with them, where they leave that is itself called, just to finish with this beautiful thing, that Hasidim, when I grew up, when they would come Tishrei to the Rebbe, or other times, where many people would travel to the Rebbe without even knowing in which home they're going to stay. Big challenge for everyone. Where would they go from the airport? Where would they go? They would go to 770. According to Rabbi Yeshai, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that was their home. Beis Chayenu. And even if they weren't planning to sleep overnight, by the way, many of them ended up Nebach sleeping overnight, Belas Bredor, they slept on a bench, mamish, but it wasn't about that. Is that when you have a place where you say, at least I can leave my stuff here. Today, many people, when they go to the oil, you leave your things in the oil. It becomes your home, which is a beautiful thing because then it's ours. Then we become more established. Beautiful.
Then you dig tunnels over there.
What was that?
Then you think you could dig a tunnel also.
Then you can dig a tunnel. Avad, it's your home.